Well, good afternoon, morning, or evening, wherever you are in the world right now. For those of you who don't know me, I am MaryAnne Howland, a small business owner of Ibis Communications and the Global Diversity Leadership Exchange, and board member and chair of the Race and Equity Working Group for the American Sustainable Business Council. On behalf of Jeffrey Hollander, our chairman and CEO, our board, and all of our team at ASBC, thank you for joining us. And welcome to our second convening of Business Confronting Racism. Your response to our call for national discourse on institutional racism and how to eradicate it has been overwhelming. And that's very encouraging. We need that right now because we have a lot of work to do. Since we first convened on June 9th, right after the murder of George Floyd, Rayshard Brooks, father of 3 daughters and a stepson, fell asleep in the drive-thru at Wendy's and ended up being shot in the back by police on June 12th. Since June 9th, after her 26-year career at Morgan Stanley, 16 of those years as the head of global diversity, Marilyn Booker is now suing the bank for racism. NASCAR driver Bubba Wallace has asked for Confederate flags to be removed from the sport, and he found a noose in the garage he was assigned to for his race at Talladega Speedway. Now, the FBI says it was there since a year ago, before he got there, but I got questions. Since May 27, police have found 6 Black men hanging from trees. And let me be clear, y'all, Black men don't go around hanging themselves from trees. Aunt Jemima and Uncle Ben's are being retired for being racist images. Now that's great, but the layers of racism are stacked like pancakes served at a Southern diner, high and mighty. Let's start with the fact that Aunt Jemima is a real person. Her name is Anna Short Harrington. Quaker Oats has been using her image since 1935 to sell pancakes to the tune of $300 million, but have never paid her or her family an equitable fair share of royalties. So the family is now suing Pepsi and Quaker Oats for $2 billion. It goes even deeper. The product itself that is heavily marketed to African Americans and indexes highest among African Americans and Hispanics, the high fructose corn syrup inside the syrup is associated with an increased risk of obesity, diabetes, heart disease, and cancer, diseases that are most prevalent and pervasive in Black and brown communities. Now, this is a perfect example of the many forms of racism in the food system, but it's also typical of the layers of racism throughout our society and our economy. As Ibrahim from Senator Pressley's office said on our call yesterday, which I thought was so astute, COVID-19's disproportionate impact on Black communities has revealed that there are crises within crises. They are interrelated. And the scourge of systemic racism is longstanding, even enshrined in monuments of racism, the Robert E. Lees, the Jefferson Davises, Stonewall Mountain, and Confederate flags throughout the country. But they're coming down. And while folks are protesting and marching outside in the streets, there's a revolution that's going on in our hearts and minds. We are marching for meaningful change. And policy is the work that undergirds the institutional change that can embed the rights to protect and uplift all of us to ensure everyone has equal access to the American dream. Our business community of 300,000 plus member businesses and growing can have significant impact to help make this happen. I know that many of us are doing deep dives into diversity training and developing cultural competency at our businesses, some even taking seriously board diversity. And we've bought bookstores out of their copies of White Fragility and How to Be an Anti-Racist. And if you haven't read already, I would strongly recommend The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander, anything by James Baldwin, and my own book, Warrior Rising, How 4 Men Helped a Boy on His Journey to Manhood, which is a personal memoir about a Black mother raising her Black son in America. And while the continuing education is extremely important, there's work we can do right now with your help. With all of us at the table together to bring diversity of thoughts and ideas through our backgrounds and experiences and the human values of truth, enlightenment, facts, and empathy to every part of our economy, we can create a compassionate economy. But it's not easy. It requires that every one of us be able to listen, especially to those among us who have suffered the most. We know where the changes need to be made and have valuable insight into what the best solutions may be. That means there must be an ability to trust without bias and resist the urge to presume or assume anything. This is the time to challenge existing thought and provoke new thought to address systemic racism. It's time to reset, reimagine, from policing and the criminal justice system to the role of investment in communities, to addressing the food system and protecting the election. Today, we are committed to challenging ourselves to do just that. Now, I'd like to introduce someone who has long been challenging us to fight for our democracy, and who I have known and grown to respect as a fearless leader who has been a champion dismantling the white supremacy since I met him in 2006 through Social Venture Network, Ben Cohen. And Ben is someone who doesn't need introduction from me, so I'm just going to turn it over. Ben?
Thanks a lot, MaryAnne. What a beautiful introduction to this afternoon's session. You know, I found myself in DC a couple of weekends ago because I personally had no choice but to put my feet where my heart was. And it was just so beautiful to see this largely white crowd of protesters all over the city of Washington. I mean, there wasn't just one protest. I mean, there were, I don't know how many protests happening at the same time. And, you know, they were peaceful, they were kind, and they were determined. You know, every time the police kill an unarmed Black person, you know, we're outraged. And, you know, it seems so gross and horrible and, you know, in front of everybody's eyes, thanks to smartphones, that it seems like they couldn't possibly do it again. And they just keep on doing it again and again. And this series of events, you know, Ahmaud Arbery, the woman in Central Park, and then George Floyd, just catalyzed the outrage. And that's a good thing. You know, the fear, of course, is that, you know, we're going to have our moment of outrage and then we're going to go back to business as usual. Everybody's going to say the right things. You know, this time, you know, we've got loads of corporations saying the right things, some sincere, some just wanting to say the right thing. You know, and I happened to be in the car listening to NPR today, and there was, you know, there was this senator who was part of the Kerner Commission report, which happened after the violence and the riots in the 1960s that were related to race. And, you know, the Kerner Commission report, you know, famously came out and said we live in two Americas, one white, one Black. And they came up with the solutions to the problem. You know, we need to deal with education. We need to get decent jobs. We need to get decent housing. And, you know, they shelved it. They shelved that report. They did nothing with it. The situation now is the same as it was back then. And it's our responsibility as business people that are leaders in our communities, business people that are looked upon as people who have some power, people who deal with a bunch of other people, people who have a voice, people who, when they go to their local town councils, people, listen. And especially if we act together, people listen. So going forward, it's not about making statements. It's about producing timelines with commitments of what each of our businesses is going to do in order to add a more diverse supplier base, more diverse employees, and to use our public voices to take a stand. I personally, I believe that the question in people's minds is how is it that cops continually get away with murder? I mean, we see it happen on video, and then these guys, often they're not charged, or if they are charged, they're not convicted. And so what I've personally focused on is this issue of qualified immunity. It's a series of Supreme Court decisions that have essentially said that a person who has been denied their civil rights or their life, we cannot sue on that person's behalf unless there has been an exact situation in the past that has been ruled, that has won in court. If there hasn't been, then you can't take your case to court. So it's a catch-22. If there's not a precedent, you can't win. And since you can't win, you can't set a precedent. So this bill has been introduced by Ayanna Presley and Justin Amash, bipartisan. He's a libertarian. And Ben and Jerry and me, not the company. The company has done some amazing things. Amazingly enough, they've done it on their own. I had nothing to do with it, except founding it and trying to inculcate my values into the company. And incredibly enough, I mean, it's not my values. I mean, it's just the value of justice. I heard a ding. That must probably mean that my time is up. But, every day in public school, we said the Pledge of Allegiance. And that pledge ends with the words, "and justice for all." Now is the time. Now is the moment when we can finally make justice real. Thanks.
Thank you, Ben. As always, I just love your words. And it's not fair to say at all that the way that Ben and Jerry's, the company, represents today, that you had nothing to do with it. I think you had a little something to do with that. So thank you again. And since you mentioned Ayanna Presley, next I'm happy to announce that we have a representative from her office. Congresswoman Ayanna Presley is an advocate, a policymaker, an activist, and a survivor. On November 6, 2018, Congresswoman Pressley was elected to represent Massachusetts' 7th Congressional District in the U.S. House of Representatives, making her the first woman of color to be elected to Congress from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Like many in her district, Congresswoman Pressley has endured numerous hardships throughout her life, and it is because of those experiences that she believes that the people closest to the pain should be closest to the power. Hear, hear. Driving and informing policy making. So today we have with us Ibrahim, who serves as the economic policy advisor for the Congresswoman, focusing on banking, tech, and civil liberties issues. As the Congresswoman's liaison to the House Financial Services Committee, Aya has played a critical role on efforts to reform the credit reporting system expanding the social safety net, and is an advocate for greater equity in federal programming and responses. And prior to joining Congresswoman Pressley's team, Aya supported the election of diverse candidates at the state and local level before moving to federal work on financial services and technology. So without further ado, allow me to introduce the wonderful Aya Ibrahim. Aya?
Apologies, I was on mute. No, thank you so much, MaryAnne, for that introduction. As you said, my name is Ayanna Ibrahim, and I serve as the policy advisor for Congresswoman Ayanna Presley, managing her work on the Financial Services Committee and economic policy more broadly, as well as our civil rights and civil liberties portfolio. While this may seem like a little bit of an odd combination of issues, as a good friend of mine often says, there's no such thing as choice if you're hungry. So the extent to which people's rights and liberties are protected is often constrained by their material conditions. And I often think of one Coretta Scott King quote in particular, where she contended that starving a child is violence, neglecting school children is violence, punishing a mother and her family is violence, discrimination against a working man is violence, ghetto housing is violence, ignoring medical need is violence, contempt for poverty is violence. These crises within crises have only further exposed deeply entrenched inequities across business, education, housing, and healthcare opportunities. To be clear, though, these inequities are not simply a matter of chance or circumstance, but the result of centuries of racist federal programming and responses. So from the Homestead Act to New Deal programs and the GI Bill, Black Americans have always been systematically excluded from the federal government's largest investments and responses in times of crisis. Yet again, this pandemic and subsequent economic crisis, ravage Black and brown communities, we're finding that in many ways the federal response is coming up short. Poor healthcare, disproportionately high participation in low-wage work, particularly in industries most affected, unstable housing, lack of childcare, food insecurity, all these things are undermining Black and brown communities' ability to protect themselves and their ability to weather this latest storm. I know folks here are likely very familiar with the Paycheck Protection Program and perhaps even more familiar with its shortcomings, conditioning access to relief on access to banking, granting preference to those already in a position to benefit from more traditional financing or access to capital and credit. And keeping in mind that we did this knowing that up to 90% of Black women business owners may not have been able to access the program. We did this knowing that Black and brown business owners are less likely to secure credit through traditional means, even in good times. And if they are able to, it's often for lower amounts and at higher rates. That's why Congresswoman Pressley and Senator Harris introduced the Saving Our Street Act, which would actually provide up to $250,000 in grant funding to micro and minority businesses. Because again, these businesses should not be put in a position to potentially take on more debt for reasons beyond their control. For me personally, I often see things in economic terms, but if these latest crises and this epidemic of police violence has shown us anything, it's that economic justice and racial justice are inextricably linked. That is why we have been advocating very heavily on ending qualified immunity, and why Congresswoman Pressley and Representative Amash introduced the Ending Qualified Immunity Act, which would fully eliminate this Supreme Court invented doctrine of protection for police officers and other officials that violate people's civil rights. But very excited to participate in today's conversation and to hear from you all some ideas about how the business community can play a more active role in some of these conversations. In many ways, you all can be great partners in this work. And sort of the sad reality is that throughout history, we have found that sometimes the business community has also been complicit in some of the worst policies that we've seen enacted, redlining, for example. And so, as we look to the future and opportunities for partnership and collaboration on better policy more people-focused policy. I hope that, we'll keep all of these things in mind. I'm excited for today's discussion. So thank you all for having me. Back to you, MaryAnne.
Thank you, Aya. And please give our warm regards to Senator Presley. And she's a fellow alum of Boston University, so I'm particularly proud of her. We appreciate the incredible job she's doing to represent Massachusetts in fighting for dismantling of mass incarceration and holding police and correctional officers accountable and fighting structural racism throughout the country. So, we thank you for coming to represent her and let her know that we all give her our full support. Now I'm going to turn it over to Thomas Opel, our Executive Vice President at American Sustainable Business Council, who leads our wonderful team that produced today's webinar. And he's going to tell you about the individuals who are leading our subgroups and provide the details of how we're going to leverage our collective intelligence into policy collaboration. Thomas?
Thank you, MaryAnne, and thank you, Ben and Aya. I was excited before this call started, and I'm even more excited now. I just am convinced that we are going to take what is a moment in time, and there have been moments like this before, certainly in my lifetime, going back to 1968, even throughout the 60s. We cannot let this moment pass without truly finally getting back to this notion of equal justice under the law. Equal justice under law. We simply can't continue, to borrow Lincoln's words, in a different context, to live in a house divided, with one part of the house sharing benefits and privileges that the rest of the folks in the house don't enjoy. Unearned privileges, by the way. Let me just say, the American Sustainable Business Council, for those of you, many of you may know, but let me take just a minute to do a quick commercial. We represent through direct members like Ben and Jerry's, we're proud to say, or seventh generation companies who are members, as well as organizations like the Sustainable Food Trade Association, the Sustainable Furnishings Council, many others, including many who were kind enough to help us sponsor this event today. And they were listed on the registration page that y'all saw. So, let's please acknowledge them as well, including the American Independent Business Alliance. Derek Peebles is on this call today and will be leading one group. AMIBA has been a very good partner throughout the multiple crises that we faced in the last few months, from a health crisis with COVID-19 that created an economic crisis that each of which has just again exposed the racial injustice crises, long-term crises that we've lived with since the first Europeans came to this continent 400 plus years ago. ASBC is this network of businesses that helps to amplify the voice of business, and we're trying to help change that narrative. Aya mentioned it. Too often businesses have been represented by groups that were opposed to change of any kind, that were opposed to any kind of progress, and that saw the business of their business as a short-term profit-making enterprise, and focused only on the bottom line. What the businesses of ASBC recognize is that bottom line must include not just shareholders, whether you have them as a public company or not, but it must include a long-term view that includes every stakeholder, all of the employees, the communities, the people who live in the communities that companies are headquartered in, that do business in, that companies, employees, and owners live in, and the rest of the world. And there may not be any better symbolism than the masks that we appropriately wear in public. And the wearing of the mask is less about protecting ourselves than it is about protecting our fellow human beings. And so I think that's pretty symbolic, and is a concrete reminder of what we're here about. So let me get to the quick logistics, and then we'll get to the breakout rooms. In just a few minutes, we'll be going into breakout rooms. Each of you indicated when you registered for this an interest in one of the groups. And there may be a slight delay. We had a tremendous response to this, and the folks, the team that MaryAnne referred to, who have done just wonderful work and make all of us look good, and they're the ones who are just really working hard to make this as seamless as possible. May take a few minutes to make sure everybody's in the right room. So as we go to the breakout rooms, as we transition, what you'll see on your screen is a request to move to a breakout room. Please acknowledge that and say, yeah, I'm ready to go. If you don't get it, we'll catch up with you and make sure you get in the right rooms. So like I say, that may take a few minutes. The other thing I would say is that in the breakout rooms, one of the points of this, and several people have talked about this, we really want to try and make this an event that leads to some concrete actions, concrete ideas, that it's not just a conversation, although we hope for a very good conversation in each of those rooms, but it's a conversation that leads toward action. As I said, we have a moment. We need to turn that moment, as I learned when I first went to the state of Mississippi to do political campaigns, not just talking the talk, but actually walking the walk. So with that, I'll turn it over to the very talented Megan Birnbaum, who is going to move us into these breakout sessions and get us started. So Megan, wherever you are in the magic of the ozone.
Yep. You'll get a notification shortly with a prompt to go into a breakout room, so please accept that.
Never mind that woman behind the curtain.
All right, MaryAnne, if you want to take it away with some closing remarks, the floor is yours.
Okay, well, I just really want to say thank you to everyone who participated this afternoon. We can't tell you how much we appreciate you taking time out of your day to join us. And I don't know about the other sessions, but I think ours was the best. So if you were in room 1, shout out. And I'm sure that all the other rooms were wonderful too. And we're going to be capturing, the conversations. I believe most of them were recorded. We've taken notes. And the intent is that we will capture all of the conversation and the ideas and the thoughts and the next actions and share that with everyone so that we can continue our work moving forward. What we are planning to do is, going forward, we will convene this, our working groups once a month, so that all of you, if it'd be great if you could participate every month, but just know that we will now make sure that you're included on the list, and we'll build out our work together so that we can see some activity and results along the way. And then I just also really want to thank our incredible team. The work of Kathleen and Megan and Cohen and Tamika and the rest of them. I know I'm leaving out a bunch of names for really pulling this all together. And we've had, like I said, an overwhelming response, and we're so delighted that we have a team that's as proficient as it is to be able to make this happen. So I want to thank you guys for doing a tremendous job. And with that, I will close, hoping that over the next couple of weeks that the news gives us a little bit of a break, and that, you know, we don't have, God forbid, yet another murder or by cop, as it seems to be weekly. I'm hoping and praying that, you know, we you know, get through this COVID-19 with some dignity and respect for one another. I hope that, you know, you guys are encouraged and inspired and know that you have a community of support here with you. So we're here. And if anybody has any questions or wants to follow up in any way, please feel free to reach out at any time. I love hearing from you. So does Thomas, so do all of us. So with that, I'm going to say goodbye, but I think that Thomas, I don't know, you may have something more that you want to remind our listeners and folks who are on this call.
Just from ASBC, I want to thank everybody. I think Ben and I had the best room, but with Aya, but I'm sure the others were great. I'm sure room 1 was fabulous with you, MaryAnne. The point of this is the conversations were great. The action is better. So the more we can focus on what next steps we need to do and then doing them, not just talking the talk, but walking the walk. And I would encourage you, please go to the ASBC website. There's several opportunities to sign on to a number of pieces of legislation that deal with both policing as well as the economic injustice and inequities. And we'll continue to be working on those issues and others for that just, equitable, more broadly prosperous, vibrant economy and world. And again, I thank you. Ben, you have any closing words you'd like to offer? I think Ben's still with us. I hope Ben's still with us. Ben, are you muted? I can't unmute you.
Unmute me. All right, I'm unmuted.
You're good.
You know, the sign that I brought with me to DC said that justice will not be served until those who are unaffected are as outraged as those who are. That's a quote from Ben Franklin, the other Ben. This is the time to turn outrage into action. It doesn't help to be outraged if we don't take the actions to make the changes that we need. In our own businesses, in terms of KPIs, with timelines and numbers about how we're going to change our suppliers and our vendors, our professionals that we work with, and also in terms of using our power as business people to advocate for change at the local and federal levels.
Thank you, Ben. Well said. Outrage into action. I love it. Those are wonderful parting words for everyone. So thank you, everybody. And I look forward to seeing all of your faces again soon, maybe in the next month.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Gracias.
Gracias.
Loved it. Thank you so much. Very grateful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Gloria.
Yes.
Kathleen, you can save the chat, right?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. Okay. The individual room chats are savable too?
Oh, let me look into that.
So
I'm
what-
assuming so, but I don't want to,
Yeah.
let me figure it out.
What I saw was that, I don't know, I somehow was scrolling through a whole chat with all chats from all rooms. So hopefully that file is obtainable.
Oh, good. Okay. It ought to be someplace.
I agree.
I can't believe it just goes away. Megan, Rockstar, another,
Yes.
that was really, really, I can't imagine what you were trying to do when we went to breakout rooms. That must have been mad.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm
You have
sweating a
nerves.
little.
You have nerves of steel.
Oh my God, really? You could be an air traffic controller.
Oh gosh. Yeah.
How many? We should end this call and maybe jump on a quick.
A recap.
Yeah, let me. I'll send out an invite. How's that?
Okay, great. All right,
Okay.
wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.